Ted, been in the geospatial industry a long time, not quite up to 37 years, maybe about 20 years, and I guess I've seen quite a lot of change, but really what I wanted to dwell on, and I'm not going to talk too much to the slides, and I'm going to be a bit indulgent as well, because the reason why I wanted to come to this event was as much to get back in touch with the industry and understand what's happening. So having had 20 years in the geospatial industry, for the last 2 or 3 years, I've basically been working with mechanical and electrical engineering. So part of our business, and I guess it'll come through maybe on the slide here, we do 3 things. We design, build, and maintain, and 70% of our company is doing mechanical and electrical engineering for aerospace, for rail, and I had the interesting challenge as a geographer of running that part of the business in Europe for a couple of years. So I was dealing with projects where we were worrying about trains, we were worrying about semiconductors, we were worrying about very different outcomes, I think, to what we talk about in industry. And what I was interested in, and I've now literally in the last month come back into the geospatial world after 2 or 3 years. It's great to be back. And what better forum than Sanjay's event here to reintroduce myself. So I guess where and I'm going to be a little bit indulgent through my presentation and also through the day, because I'm really interested to learn and hear from you guys. So I don't think I've got necessarily a very precise story to tell you, but I guess I've got a couple of things that are really sort of, I guess, troubling me as a geospatial guy coming back into industry and looking where we are. And probably the 2 things that I want to talk a little bit about are outcomes and content. And there's a nice segue in from, I think, Ted and Mark's presentation. So I guess if I look at the industry and I look at kind of the areas where we operate, and for us, the markets in geospatial are things like comms, like utilities. I'd say, I absolutely agree with the previous speakers. Location is underpinning lots of applications, but it's not really driving. I don't think it's really driving the outcomes. The outcomes are about the disruptions that's happening on a utility network around electric, the smart grid, the distributed generation. And yes, we're an enabler, but the geospatial industry, I don't think is really driving the outcomes. I think one of the things we struggled, and to your point around maps, I mean, a whole industry was built around building digital maps and building mapping, and I don't think that's really relevant anymore. So, what's our role and what's the outcome that we have? And I think there are some lessons from the mechanical engineers and the electrical engineers. They're driven by cost, they're driven by time to market, they're driven by quality, they're driven by the need to manufacture things, lean manufacturing, all these disciplines that I just don't think we sometimes get in this industry. And I could be a little bit provocative and say BIM is GIS, sort of a new version of GIS, and we got very hung up on GIS and what's the relevance of GIS. BIM again, what's the outcomes? And it's enabling technology. So it does worry me a little bit that the relevance of where geospatial sits. And I think there are a couple of areas, and I guess when I come back and look at the market, I think there's a couple of things that get me quite excited. I think this whole autonomous vehicle area is a real opportunity for us as an industry to stamp a standards, to stamp a precedent of what it means, and really because location's at the heart of that. I mean, you talked about navigation. Location's at the heart of that whole sector. And I don't think there's really any standards. I don't think there's anything that's really been, everybody's doing everything a little bit cloak and dagger. There's clearly a lot of money being spent on it. But I think there is an opportunity for us as a group to really take hold of that and address it. The other sort of comment, and again, it's great seeing all these 3D maps, and we're doing a lot of work on LiDAR and stuff like that, but it's all just data. And I guess the meaningful interpretation, and to the point around standards, I think standards do have a really big role to play even in this big data environment, because I think we're missing a lot of, we're creating far too much content, and I don't think there's enough. My observation when I come from looking at the mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, they have a much more structured world, and not to say I want us to become very structured, but I think there's, we're getting wowed by the technology again, we're getting wowed by the content, we're getting wowed by the data, but I'm not sure the applications really reflect the information out there. So I think to step back, a number of things. I mean, if I look at, for example, an industry like this, take these, if I look at a few industries that I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years, aerospace, rail transportation, medical technology. It was interesting your point around, I think Ted, you said about the sharing of cost and the sort of risk reward. I mean, that's, I think I'd like to see a lot more in the industry. If I look at what we had to do with some of our aerospace customers, we're having to drive the agenda in terms of cost. We're having to drive the ideas in terms of how you take money out of the out of the game. And I think there are absolutely opportunities in terms of business model that we need to think about in the industry. Likewise, I think in industries like medtech, where the cost equation is fundamentally changing, the accessibility technology, the business models that are being thought about there, I think we're just sort of, I'm not sure we're really seeing, or I haven't seen them yet coming back into the geospatial industry and talking to the customers, the traditional users of geospatial. And I'm not necessarily talking about military, I don't have too much exposure to, but the traditional geospatial users. So I think, in terms of what I'm interested in and really what I want to pick up on over the next couple of days, and I really, it's more questions and thoughts, and I think it's really, what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve with the investments in our technology? Where does geospatial fit in? But also, I think there's a really strong play on content, and I don't know in the room who are more. I know there's lots of technology people here who are more on the technology side than the content side, and who's more on the content side. But I think the content piece, I think, is really interesting, and I think that's the area. Certainly, as I look at the market, and I look at the future for us, I think that's really where we have a strong right to play and a right to really stamp. Right back to your premise of where mapping started. It was about information, and I think the technology piece is absolutely important, and the right platforms. But there's nothing new that we're doing in our industry that, compared to other industries, we're leveraging best practice. But I think we really do have to think more about the content, and I know there'll be some interesting presentations later on. So I really, I don't have much more to say, and I know you've also got some pressure on your agenda, so I will leave it there for the moment, and I will happily contribute during the day.
Well, it's great that you're back.
Thank you.